The synthetic nation, a financial key to the kingdom. Fear it not, they'll push each other to reach higher in the fold. Do not side with them as brother. Waves that rise can never hold. The centralisation trap, nationalism as the Trojan horse of usury. The establishment of the Pax Cabalica, the globalist financial order, was not an accidental byproduct of modernity. It was the deliberate objective of the revolutionary waves of 1789 and 1848. This started back with the English Civil War, but we'll get to that at another time. While history books frame these events as the awakening of peoples against monarchical tyranny, an esoteric analysis reveals them to be the consolidation of markets by a burgeoning financial oligarchy. The mechanism was simple but devastating. Nationalism was weaponized to destroy organic, local sovereignty and replace it with centralized state machinery. This centralization was the necessary prerequisite for the imposition of central banking, for one cannot install a single financial parasite on 1,000 independent hosts. One must first weld the hosts into a single, manageable body through a singular, universal, synthetic identity, an imagined tribe. 1789, the atomization of the individual. The French Revolution was the pilot program for this restructuring. Before 1789, power in France was diffuse, held by guilds, the church, regional parliaments, and the aristocracy. This organic complexity was a nightmare for usurious interests because it was impossible to standardise taxation or impose a singular debt currency. The revolution's liberty, equality, fraternity was a pretext for the Le Chapelier Law 1791, which banned guilds and trade associations. The revolutionaries destroyed the core intermediaries, the intermediate bodies that stood between the individual and the state. The citizen was liberated from his local tribe and guild, only to be left naked before the state. He then became a Frenchman, an abstract administrative unit, in a standardised grid. This atomization paved the way for the creation of the Banque de France, 1800, with the organic resistance of the provinces crushed and the nation declared supreme. The state could grant a monopoly on currency issuance to a private banking cartel. The nation became the collateral for the state's debt. The 1848, the spring of nations as market consolidation. The revolutions of 1848 spread this virus across Europe under the guise of national unification. In Germany and Italy, the cry of blood and soil was used to delegitimize the dozens of independent duchies, principalities, and free cities that characterized the Holy Roman Empire structure. The financial elite funded nationalist movements, not to free the people, but to standardize the jurisdiction. It is inefficient for a banking house, of course, to negotiate with 50 independent dukes, each with their own gold currency and trade laws and, of course, interests. By inciting the masses to demand a united Germany or united Italy, the bankers effectively crowdsourced their own hostile takeover into, again, a singular entity with a singular hierarchical political salesman class, of which these political salesmen were fewer in number. Therefore, you could have greater control over them, and you didn't have to impose as much resource-intensive blackmail operations or compromat operations to thus get blackmail on them and to establish these intricate economies of blackmail. So it's centralized everything, which is of course what power is always after. The nation swallowed the principalities. Once Germany was unified, later solidified in 1871, the Reichsbank was established 1876. A single central bank could now dictate the economic life of millions, replacing diverse local currencies with a single debt-based fiat standard manageable from a central hub. So the genius of this nationalist identity was that it acted as a psychic blindfold. The populace was taught to worship the abstract concept of the nation, the flag, the anthem, the border. This new synthetic identity replaced their tangible loyalty to their kin, their guild, and their land. Because the people identified with the nation-state, they viewed the state's debt as their debt and the state's wars as their wars. When the central bank inflated the currency to fund a war, the quote-quote patriot accepted the inflation as a sacrifice for the fatherland or motherland, rather than seeing it for what it was, theft by the financiers. And moreover as well, think about it, the motherland, the fatherland. I don't know about you, but in terms of these surrogate families, the nation being the surrogate family, which is a hijacking of the organic familial structure. Again, dead things need preservatives, living things do not. What family, right, what father or mother would enforce upon their children, banners, a flag, an anthem, borders, wars, inflation, but most acutely, that of flags and anthems, right? Or pledges of allegiance. What family has that type of structure to maintain itself? Does any child in any family have to pledge allegiance to the flag, wave the flag, love the flag of the family, sing the anthem of the family? No. Because the family is a living, organic structure. It doesn't require that. The nation requires that. The nation is not a living, organic structure. It's an artificial, undead force. It is a synthetic entity that must be perpetually propped up, vis-a-vis you feeding it your energy. It's an egregore, a tulpa, a psychic projection, a figment of the mass collectivized delusion of the imagination of the zeitgeist. The nation-state, born in the fires of 1789 and 1848, was never designed to be a fortress for the people. It was designed to be a containment vessel, one that still works to this day, as you can see by, if you go into my Odyssey, the previous discussion that I did on this, with Armin and Zeal and Kazumbo, the trap of race-based nationalism, blood and soil programming, it riled up a lot of people, ruffled up a lot of feathers, because these people are in a containment vessel, and it's the only hope that they have. Right? It's the only hope that they have. But they cannot see that it has been artificially created, and the reason it's a containment vessel, these nation-states, these nations really, there's no difference, by the way, between the nation-state and the nation. Both are the same thing. They're a hijacking of the family unit, a surrogate family. And it will produce, by the way, at the end of all of this, once Britain collapses, France, America, Canada, all of these nations, they all collapse, given enough time. Once they collapse, people will realise, I believe, I hope people will realise, probably not, they'll go to their grave believing this lie, that the belief in the nation is what perpetuated this accursed agenda. It made people socio-politically paralysed. And the reason for that is because these individuals who work on smaller distributed cell network structures in terms of their organisational structures, on these more tangible Dunbar compliant units, again under 150 people or so, they can function in a far more versatile and flexible manner. They're far more manoeuvrable, socially speaking. And the reason for that is because they work on a time horizon in terms of their decision making, capabilities of about 4 weeks. With the nation states, I mean, because of the behemothing structure of it, it's this sort of large-scale allegiance that's hard to maneuver and steer. This great beast that can't see anything, that moves with like trundling along, with lumberous steps. It works on roughly about 4 year, at minimum 4 year timescales in terms of decision making, and of course that's been hijacked with the democratic lie, the illusion of democracy in the ballot. So you're always going to lose against smaller scale structures. That's why they got rid of the clan-based system here in Scotland. That's why the clans were driven off their land, because the government can't control smaller scale contingents of people, because it's a true family structure. It's a Dunbar compliant structure. It's far more versatile. It's far more dangerous. That's why they got rid of them in Japan as well, all the clans. It's of course why they got rid of the Native American tribes as well. In fact, it's why they Christianized Europe as well. Got rid of all of the pagan diversity, if you will. Because the reason for that is with this blanket identity of Christianity, which was the previous sort of large-scale, either European or white identity. People would typically, prior to the nation state, they would see themselves along the lines of, their religious affiliation. So they would see themselves as Catholic, for example, prior to the Reformation. And they would identify as such. That was a large-scale allegiance, a beige allegiance, which universalized everyone. Again, so they couldn't understand or connect with each other in a deeper, meaningful way. They were part of this large-scale allegiance that was beholden to faceless entities at the zenith of the hierarchy. They couldn't quite understand or love the identity, let's say Catholicism, because it was beyond the cognitive limit of the Dunbar number. So again, they loved the thought of Catholicism rather than Catholicism itself. Most people couldn't even read, right? Nor were they allowed to read the Bible prior to the Reformation. So therefore, how could you identify with this thing if you were ignorant of it? Because you loved the thought of the identity. It was a brand. You loved the thought of the brand rather than what the brand actually was, because you couldn't quite comprehend what the brand was because it was beyond the Dunbar number. It was beyond your cognitive limits as a human being. It wasn't meaningful. So you had to turn it into an abstraction, an imagined concept within your mind, propelled and inculcated by social messaging. That is what gave it some semblance of meaning. So you loved the thought of the thing rather than the thing itself. It's the same with the nation. It's the same with this notion of whiteness. Nationalism was designed to be a containment vessel. They were standardized tax farms, large enough to collateralize massive loans, yet centralized enough to be controlled by a single boardroom. Within the parliament, the cabinet, the administration, whatever it may be. Nationalism was merely the emotional software installed in the populace to make them defend their own prison, ensuring that the moneyed interests could extract their usury without resistance from the organic communities they had liquidated. So based on historical records, every major nationalistic centralization, either achieved through military conquest, revolution, or political unification, was met with the subsequent creation of a central bank to thus consolidate the new state's financial power. We're going to go through them all. This goes from 1568, give or take, all the way through to that of 1864, though, of course, bear it in mind, this is not an exhaustive list. So firstly, the Netherlands. The centralising event was the Dutch Revolt, the 80 Years' War. The year of the event was 1568 to 1648, though you also had a Dutch revolt within, I believe, 1751, if I recall correctly, there or thereabouts. It was in the 18th century. And then you had the central bank being created, the Amsterdamsche Wisselbank, the Bank of Amsterdam. Now, the year of the creation was 1609. And so the revolt against the Spanish Habsburgs established the Dutch Republic as a proto-nation state. The bank was founded to stabilise the currency of the rising mercantile empire and consolidate the financial power of the city of Amsterdam, eventually serving as the model for the Bank of England. And then we go on to England. This started with the English Civil War, and then later the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution was in 1688. The English Civil War was in 1642. And then we had the Bank of England in 1694. And just after that, well, we'll get into that actually here. So following the overthrow of James II Stuart and the installation of William III of Orange, again from the Dutch Republic, as you can see, there's a connection here. The tumour is spreading throughout all of Europe. The bank was founded to fund the new regime's war efforts against France and stabilise the state's finances, linking the monarchy's survival to the City of London. The Stuart dynasty was eventually overthrown by the international banking dynasties rooted in Amsterdam at that moment in time by the Act of Settlement in 1701 and the eventual Act of Union in 1704. Eventually that was ratified in Scotland, I believe in 1706 or 1707, and then Scotland joined the Bank of England there or thereabouts as well, thus completing a near 80-year revolution that upturned the status quo and unified the kingdoms of these here isles into a singular proto-nation state ready for the imposition of the Bank of England in 1694. In another video we shall go into the overthrow of the Stuart dynasty by the Rabbinate of Mulheim and the Kabbalistic financial powers of who rested in those days in the ill-famed merchants' paradise of Amsterdam. And then we go into France, the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, 1789 to 1799, and then the subsequent formation of the central bank, Banque de France, in 1800. That was created by Napoleon Bonaparte shortly after his coup to restore economic order following the revolutionary chaos and to finance the state's military expansion. It obtained a monopoly on the issuing of notes in Paris in 1803. Then we go into Belgium. The Belgian Revolution, their independence in 1830. And then the subsequent National Bank of Belgium was founded in 1850. After breaking away from the Netherlands, the new Belgian state established the bank to restrict the leverage of the private banking sector, unify the currency and secure the state's monetary stability. We go into Spain. Liberal victories, the Carlist Wars, 1833 to 1874, and then we had two subsequent creations of the Banco de España in 1856 and 1874. The Banco de San Fernando was renamed the Banco de España in 1856 following liberal reforms. It was granted full national monopoly in currency issuance in 1874 to finance the government's victory in the Third Carlist War and to consolidate the liberal state. Then we had Germany, the unification of Germany, 1871, Reichsbank, 1876. Do you see the connections here? This is why the nation-states were created. They're not ancient institutions, they're complete abstractions. They're the consolidation of tax jurisdictions for the imposition of a foreign central bank that masquerades as a national central bank. All of you nationalists have been had. This thing was snake oil from the beginning. So, yeah, we had Germany, the unification of Germany, and then the Reichsbank. So, only 6 years apart in that. So following the Prussian military victories and the proclamation of the German Empire, the Reichsbank was established to replace the diverse currencies of the independent German states with a single gold-backed currency, cementing political unity with economic unity. On to Japan, the Meiji Restoration, 1868. I believe that finished in I think it was 1888. It was quite a period of time, and then you had, I believe, the Boshin War right at the beginning of that. I think it ended in 1871. I can't quite recall now, but the Tokugawa shogunate was ousted from power after about a 250-year, and a near 3-century reign, give or take. So we had the Meiji Restoration 1868, and then the Bank of Japan in 1882. So it was very near the end of the Meiji Restoration, that the Bank of Japan, the Central Bank of Japan, was established. The Meiji government overthrew the feudal shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, to modernize and centralize Japan. The central bank was created to withdraw the chaotic mix of feudal paper money and national banknotes, replacing them with a single state-controlled currency to fund industrialization and military build-up. Again, this permits those who control the fiat, it permits them the ability to multiply nothingness into value, which allows them an absolutely unbridled versatility and flexibility in terms of reshaping the global landscape, the geopolitical landscape, again, so they can set up the nation states as dominoes and then ignite that with the momentum and watch them all topple until it creates the pathway for, of course, the Ben Salem or the New Atlantis that was foretold and prophesized in their various sacred books of instructions, should we say. And then we go into Italy, the Risorgimento, unification, 1861 to 1871. And look at all of this. Look at the absolute outburst of all of these revolutions in a very quick succession, all around about the 1860s, 1848, to 1870, give or take. And they all nationalised, they all centralised. So right after the Risorgimento, we had the Banca d'Italia in 1893. After the military conquest that united the Italian peninsula, the financial system remained fragmented. The Banca d'Italia was founded to consolidate the note-issuing privileges of the regional banks like the banks of Naples and Sicily, eventually becoming the sole issuer in 1926. On to Switzerland, the Federal Constitution, Sonderbund War, that's the 1848 year of revolutions, that's when that occurred. And then we had the Swiss National Bank, that took some time, that was in 1907. The 1848 Constitution transformed the loose confederation of cantons into a centralised federal state after a civil war. While it centralised customs and postal services immediately, the struggle to centralise banknote issuance took longer, finally culminating in the creation of the SNB to replace the cantonal banks. And then we had the USA, the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and then we had the National Banking Acts, 1863 to 1864, while the Federal Reserve was not created until 1913. As we've stated, the Civil War forced the federal government to crush the system of state-issued banknotes. The National Banking Acts created a uniform national currency and federally chartered banks to finance the Union War effort, destroying the decentralised antebellum banking order. The nation, the surrogate family, quote, "If nationalism is so real, then why do nationalists close their doors to their compatriots of whom may be in need of charity and alms? Why does the nationalist identity require anthems and banners and pompous ritual to maintain its synthetic national family, yet a true family needs none of that? This is the ultimate litmus test that exposes the hollowness of the nation-state construct, the paradox that we have thus identified. The nationalist will weep for the abstract nation while stepping over the starving body of his actual compatriot. And this reveals that nationalism is not an extension of the family, but a simulation of it. And we have some other examples we can go through. So, for example, let's go into the State Bank of the Russian Empire, 1860. So following the Crimean War defeat and the liberal reforms of Alexander II, who abolished serfdom in 1861, the Russian state needed to modernise its finances to attract foreign capital. So then steps the State Bank, the Gosbank, which was established in 1860 by imperial decree. Unlike Western banks, it was directly owned by the state, but its creation was driven by the same modernising pressure to centralise credit and link the Russian ruble to the international gold standard favoured by European financiers, or financiers rather. And then we have Bulgaria, Romania and Serbia, the Balkan wave. The ripple effects of 1848 and the decline of the Ottoman Empire led to new nation-states in the Balkans, which immediately adopted the Western central banking model. Bulgaria, the Bulgarian National Bank in 1879, Romania, the National Bank of Romania in 1888, and the National Bank of Serbia in 1884. So as soon as these nations were liberated into the nation-state format, lo and behold, like the pattern suggests, they were fitted with the central bank hardware to integrate them into the European, or should we say Kabbalistic, debt system. It's a demonstrable fact. Here's Denmark, for example. Denmark's National Bank, it was founded in 1818. The 1848 events ended absolute monarchy but utilised the existing central bank structure. So that was one that predated it. But the Denmark's National Bank was eventually transformed fully into this central bank structure following the ousting of the absolute monarchy. Again, the ancient slavery of the priest class utilising, of course, the kingly class as the mask, that was ousted, that was, put aside for the modern slavery, which was, of course, the third faction slavery of secret societies utilising the state, which in turn utilised the apotheosized abstraction of the new deity of the nation. All of these various revolutions, all of these nationalist revolutions, you're thinking, well, maybe it was just an upsurge of the people, right? You can't prove that this has any connection to the elite. Well, in fact, actually we can. We're going to give a sort of brief summary of these, but I will go into further depth with the English Civil War, the French Revolution, and I may get into the 1848 revolutions as well. But let's look at the 1848 revolution in France, which saw the abdication of Louis Philippe. And that triggered the rest of the various revolutions of that year, of revolutions throughout all of Europe. So it was not just a revolt of the poor, it was actually a coup by the financial bourgeoisie against King Louis Philippe. And I go into this within my first book. All revolutions are funded by merchants. If it's not funded by a merchant elite, then it's a peasant revolt. And usually 9 times out of 10, I can't actually think of a peasant rebellion that has succeeded off the top of my head. But if there are any throughout history, they are few and far between, and they don't occur on grand scales. They might occur for a period of time within, localised, isolated baronies. but not on large scales, you know, not entire fiefdoms or larger principalities or what have you. So all successful revolutions are merchants' wars against the elite of that society, namely the priest class and the kingly class, the aristocracy. So this is what you see, that we are living in the world of the third faction. That's why everything is completely massified. It's based around secret societies. It's based around mystical doctrines that are hidden throughout symbolism, and symbolism through pop culture and music and art. So anyway, the funders of this revolution were prominent Republican bankers like Michel Gouchot, who became the Minister of Finance immediately after the revolution, and the Fould family. Achille Fould later became Napoleon III's finance minister. They were all key players. The motive for it was the July monarchy of Louis Philippe, which was viewed as too cautious and tied to landed aristocracy. Therefore, the financial class wanted a republic, and later an empire, that would aggressively expand credit and railway infrastructure. And the outcome of that revolution installed a provisional government dominated by these financiers. Gouchot immediately organised the national workshops, but also managed the treasury to ensure the banking sector's dominance over the new state. The Frankfurt bankers funding the German uprising. In Germany, the 1848 revolution centred on the Frankfurt Parliament. This was not a peasant revolt, it was a professors' parliament funded by the Rhineland financial elite. The funders, the revolution was heavily supported by the Meissen and Camphausen banking families in the Rhineland. Ludolf Camphausen, a wealthy banker and railway magnate, actually became the Prime Minister of Prussia during the revolutionary period, March 1848. By the way, in that revolution, Meissen, Camphausen, they were, though of course they were aristocracy, they were banking families, merchant elite, they themselves weren't the primary initiators, should we say, of that uprising. There was other power magnates at play in that remained unseen, that used them merely as an intercessor of their power. So the mechanism for that revolution in Germany, these bankers funded the liberal press like the Rheinische Zeitung and the logistical costs of the Frankfurt Assembly. They sought to unify the fractured German states into a single market, a Zollverein, to maximise the efficiency of their industrial investments. And then we have the poet Heinrich Heine and his connection to this. He was the ideological voice of the 1848 generation and a close associate of Karl Marx. He lived in Paris on a stipend provided by the Rothschild family, interestingly, specifically James de Rothschild. While the Rothschilds publicly supported stability, their private patronage of revolutionary intellectuals like Heine suggests a strategy of controlled opposition, of hedging bets. And just to mention too, the Die Neue Rheinische Zeitung, the new Rhenish paper, that was introduced by Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848. That was the successor to the Die Rheinische Zeitung, the old Rhenish newspaper, which ran from 1842 to 1843. So there's a connection there as well, right? So there you go. The entire, national formation of all of these various republics and nation states, they were all brought about by the same clique, which goes all the way back to these financier families, and they are all, basically cut from the same Kabbalistic cloth. And we see as well that those who funded
nationalist revolutions also were connected with the communist revolutions. They were all one and the same in terms of the financing of it and the teleology of these various radical movements.
And then we have the City of London and the Mazzini network, the Italian unification movement, Risorgimento, which exploded in 1848, was largely financed and directed from London. Giuseppe Mazzini, I'll talk about him in a minute, the architect of the Young Italy and Young Europe movements, operated out of London. He was supported by British liberal elites and financial interests who viewed the Austrian Empire, Italy's occupier, as a rival to British banking hegemony, or at least that's the official line. It was actually funded by the Rothschilds again. The Rothschilds are into all of this, right? And of course, the Rothschilds go back to these Frankfurt financial elite families. And most of these families and the various agents of this worldwide revolution, this tikkun, all of them trace back to these Frankfurt financial families and merchant families. So, I mean, of course, you have the Rothschilds, the Rothschilds. They were previously the Meyers. And then you have the likes of, for example, Goldschmidt, Singer, Adler, Auerbach, Bacharach, Bachrach, Balin, Wertheimer, Bamberger, Schaffenberg, Weil, Rosenthal, Marx, right? So they're all these people are all incestuous, socially and financially speaking, and they're all connected together along these lines. Epstein, of course, Gans, you have the Wexner, right? You have Les Wexner, Oppenheimer. Again, he was related to the Manhattan Project. Bing was another one. I mean, you could go on and on and on. Goldberg, Rabinowitz, Cohn or Levin, Cohen or Levy. A lot of them changed their names back to their Yiddish or Ashkenazic counterparts. Wolf, Rosenberg. I mean, so on and so forth. I mean, we could go for forever and ever and ever endlessly, but these are the types of families that they trace back to, right? And of course, these families persist throughout our present time in terms of the advancement of this agenda for world government. So, in terms of Mazzini, just to mention very quickly on Mazzini and his both Freemasonic and Kabbalistic connections. So, Mazzini supposedly was a 33rd degree Freemason. I've never been able to authenticate that. I assume it's correct because, funnily enough, when you look into Mazzini and his connections to Kabbalah, he's actually an admirer of several Kabbalistic philosophers. Least of all, the one he called the Plato of Italian Jewry. And this was a Rabbi Elia Ben-Amozeg, and that is Benamozegh. And he was a prominent 19th century Kabbalist and philosopher from Livorno. And there was a certain mutual respect that both Rabbi Elia Ben-Amozeg and Giuseppe Mazzini had for each other. But Ben-Amozeg's magnum opus, Israel et l'Humanité, Israel and humanity, it used Kabbalistic thought to offer a universalist perspective that aimed to bridge the gap between religious tradition and modern Enlightenment era thinking. Mazzini reportedly held Ben-Amozeg in high esteem, influenced by the rabbi's vision of a universal religion that aligned with Mazzini's own spiritual political ideals. And Mazzini's political philosophy was deeply religious. He rejected purely secular rationalism in favour of a religion of humanity, characterised by the motto Dio e Popolo, God and the people. This search for a mystical yet practical divine purpose mirrored the Kabbalistic concept of returning divine sparks to their origin through ethical action. Kabbalah's emphasis on the fundamental unity of the divine and the universe echoed Mazzini's belief in the fundamental unity and cooperation of mankind, and the idea that nations were divine units intended by God to serve humanity or to serve a greater goal. And just as Kabbalah views the restoration of the world, the Tikkun Olam, as a cosmic duty, Mazzini viewed the messianic predestination of Italy and Rome as a spiritual mission to lead the world into a new era of liberty and unity. And Mazzini, of course, was a member of the Carbonari and later influenced European Freemasonry. So these secret societies, of course, often incorporated Kabbalistic symbolism. They were Kabbalistic offshoots and imagery into their rituals to convey universal metaphysical truths, providing another layer of indirect contact with Kabbalistic tradition. So Giuseppe Mazzini was a Kabbalistic dupe, so to say, a useful idiot to those in power. So the strategy that the British financial establishment favoured was the breakup of the Spanish and Austrian empires into smaller nation-states that would be dependent on the City of London loans rather than autarkic empires. Eventually this would become the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and all of their various loans and of course their debt-laden system as well of international humanitarian loans. And of course we also have the Marx and Engels connection. So it is a historical irony, of course, that the Communist Manifesto was published in London in February 1848, weeks before the revolutions broke out. Friedrich Engels was the scion of a wealthy textile industrialist family. He used his capitalist profits to directly fund Karl Marx and the Communist League. The most radical elements of 1848 were not funded by the proletariat, who had no money, but by the industrial heirs who sought to use the working class as a battering ram to destroy the feudal aristocracy, clearing the path for the full dominance of the merchant banking class. So, in conclusion, the 1848 revolutions were not a spontaneous spring of nations, but a hostile takeover bid. The people provided the bodies for the barricades, but the banks provided the bread and the bullets, ensuring that when the smoke cleared, the new nation-states were deeply indebted to the very financiers who sparked the chaos. And therefore the 1848 revolutions mark the precise historical moment when the Pax Cabalica, the rule of the usurious technocratic elite, formally supplanted the Pax Dei, the rule of the monarch or the church. These financiers were the wizards who designed the vase, the nation-state to hold the battery, the debt serf. And thus the nation-state was nothing more than a vast industrial workshop, a shell in which to hold the engine of usury that was found within the financial bonds of the central banks. These various revolutions were an alchemical process of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, dissolving the organic, chaotic diversity of these various fiefdoms and medieval-like remnants and coagulating them into a single, sterile, efficient machine. It created the perfect battery size, large enough to issue massive sovereign bonds, but centralised enough to be controlled by a single bank in the capital city. And it was all perpetuated upon the destroying of the organic local tribe, the regional guild-based religious loyalties, and replacing it with the synthetic nation. And this worked why? Because the organic tribe is self-sufficient and hard to tax. The synthetic nation is an atomized collection of individuals dependent on the state, of whom they misapprehend and mistake as the deity of the self-apotheosized nation. It's all a bloody lie. And we all best wake up before we're sold even further down the river, and all of this becomes irreversible